The massive tribunal chamber stretched before them like a cathedral of judgment, its crimson lights casting long shadows across the assembled alien delegates. Admiral Kim Tae-ho felt the weight of the energy shackles around his wrists as he stood, perfectly straight, his dark eyes meeting the gaze of his executioners without flinching. The metal was cold against his skin, but his face remained calm. General Park Min-soo stood beside him, equally composed, despite the chains that bound his hands behind his back. 10 other human military leaders formed a line with them, each one maintaining the same dignified silence that had marked their entire trial. They had refused legal representation, refused to beg for mercy, and refused to show any sign of fear. The chamber buzzed with hundreds of alien voices speaking in dozens of different languages. Tall, scaled beings with yellow eyes hissed their approval from the upper galleries. Crystalline creatures that looked like living gemstones chimed in harmonious tones that somehow managed to sound cruel. Floating gas beams pulsed with colors that shifted from blue to angry red as they watched the proceedings. "Silence," commanded the lead arbiter, a massive reptilian creature whose scales reflected the red light like armor. His voice boomed through translation devices that made his words understandable to every species present. "The Galactic Confederation has reached its decision regarding the war crimes of the human species." The chamber fell quiet except for the soft humming of the recording devices that would broadcast this moment to every civilized world in the galaxy. Kim Tae-ho knew that billions of beings across thousands of worlds would watch their deaths as entertainment, a final humiliation for the species that had dared to resist galactic authority. "The primitive species called humanity," the arbiter continued, his forked tongue flicking out between razor-sharp teeth, "has been found guilty of territorial aggression, unauthorized colonization, and crimes against galactic order. These representatives of their military forces have led illegal campaigns against peaceful worlds and disrupted trade routes that have existed for millennia." Kim Tae-ho almost smiled at the lies. The peaceful worlds had been launching raids against human colonies for years. The disrupted trade routes had been used to transport weapons to Earth's enemies. But he said nothing, knowing that truth had no place in this theater of justice. A crystalline judge rose from the lower bench, her faceted body catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The sentence is death by public execution, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Let this serve as a warning to any species that believes they can challenge the established order." The alien delegates erupted in approval. Hisses, chimes, electronic buzzes, and other sounds of satisfaction filled the air. Some of the beings were actually laughing, their alien forms shaking with what passed for mirth in their species. They found the idea of human deaths amusing, as the guards moved forward to escort the prisoners back to their cells. "General Lee." Soyoung turned slightly toward Admiral Kim. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she smiled. It was not the smile of someone facing death, but the smile of someone who knew a secret. The expression lasted only a second, but it was enough to puzzle the nearest guard, an insectoid creature whose compound eyes reflected confusion. The walk back to the detention level took them through corridors lined with viewing windows. Alien spectators pressed against the transparent barriers, some pointing, others making sounds that were clearly mockery. A few held recording devices, capturing images of the condemned humans for their personal collections. The holding cells were simple, but clean, each one equipped with basic furniture and a small food dispenser. The human officers were placed in adjacent cells, close enough to speak quietly to each other, but separated by energy barriers that prevented physical contact. As the guards departed, leaving only automated sensors to watch them, the condemned men and women gathered near the barriers between their cells. They spoke in whispers, their voices barely audible even to each other. "The children made it to the inner colonies," reported Colonel Bae Jun-ho, his weathered face showing relief despite their circumstances. "Good," Kim Tae-ho replied. And the civilian transports, all accounted for, confirmed, General Park. The families are safe. They spoke of home then, sharing memories of Earth's blue skies and green mountains. They talked about the cherry blossoms in spring, the way snow looked on Mount Hallison, and the sound of children playing in Seoul's parks. These were not the conversations of defeated soldiers, but the quiet words of people who believed their sacrifice had meaning. When the automated systems delivered their final meal, they ate together despite the barriers between them, sharing stories and quiet laughter. As the station's artificial night cycle began, they settled into meditation, each one preparing for the performance that would begin at dawn. General Lee So-young was the last to speak before they rested. "Remember," she said softly, "we are not dying tomorrow. We are simply changing stages." The others nodded, understanding passing between them like a shared prayer. Outside their cells, the alien guards settled in to monitor the humans' final hours, completely unaware that they were watching actors prepare for the most important performance of their lives. Dr. Han Ji-woo stood alone in the deepest chamber of Baekdu Mountain, 3 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, where no alien scanner could detect her presence. The room around her had waited in darkness for 3 decades, filled with machines that looked more like sleeping giants than military equipment. Her hands shook as she approached the central console, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything. The authorization panel required 3 separate codes, each one known by only a handful of people on Earth. She entered the first sequence, and somewhere in the mountain's depths, massive generators began to wake up. The sound was barely audible, like the breathing of some enormous creature stirring from a long sleep. The second code made the floor vibrate under her feet. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the facility, revealing corridors that stretched 4 kilometers in every direction. Most of the complex remained hidden, even from Earth's own government. Built during the early days of human space exploration, when a few visionary leaders had realized that humanity might one day need to hide its true strength. 30 years, she whispered to herself as she prepared to enter the final code. 30 years of pretending to be weak. Her finger pressed the last button, and the mountain came alive. Protocol Zero had been her life's work, developed in secret by a team of scientists who had officially died in various accidents over the years. They had all known the risks, had all understood that activating their creation would mean revealing humanity's greatest secret to a galaxy that thought humans were nothing more than primitive newcomers. Protocol Zero is now active, she announced to the empty chamber, her words echoing off walls lined with quantum processors that could calculate the movement of every ship in the solar system. Around her, displays began showing the status of hidden installations across Earth and throughout human space. The transformation began immediately. In Seoul, 5 levels below the busy subway stations, where millions of people traveled every day. Massive tunnel systems that had been disguised as utility corridors began to reconfigure themselves. What commuters had assumed were water pipes and electrical conduits were actually weapon delivery systems, capable of firing projectiles into orbit with pinpoint accuracy. The changes were subtle at first. On Jeju Island, the wind farms that tourists admired as symbols of clean energy started to move in patterns that had nothing to do with capturing wind. The turbine blades rotated into new configurations, revealing themselves as components of a massive orbital defense grid. Each turbine contained technology that could track and destroy targets anywhere in the Earth-Moon system. Ancient Buddhist temples scattered across the Korean peninsula, some of them over 1,000 years old, began to pulse with soft blue light. Hidden beneath their traditional wooden structures, quantum computers activated for the first time since their installation. The monks who tended these temples had been carefully selected over generations. Guardians of secrets they would die to protect. Captain Choi Hyun-woo floated in the pilot seat of his merchant vessel, watching asteroid mining operations through his ship's viewports, while alien patrol ships moved lazily through the area. His cargo hold was officially filled with refugees from the outer colonies, families who had lost everything when the aliens destroyed their homes. At least, that was what his ship's registration claimed. The activation signal reached him as a simple musical tone transmitted on a frequency that only human equipment could detect. He had been waiting for this moment for 15 years, ever since he had volunteered for the deep cover mission that required him to abandon his real identity and become a simple merchant captain. All stations, this is Merchant 7. He broadcast on a channel that appeared to be standard commercial traffic, beginning cargo inspection procedures. Around him, hundreds of other vessels that had been hiding among the asteroids began to respond with similar messages. To any alien listening, it sounded like routine merchant chatter, but each message was actually a confirmation that another weapons platform was coming online. Choi's ship shuddered as hidden mechanisms activated throughout its hull. The outer shell, which had been designed to look like a cheap civilian transport, began to split open like the petals of a metal flower. Beneath the disguise lay weapon systems that incorporated technology decades ahead of anything humanity had publicly demonstrated. The ship's cargo bay opened to reveal not refugees, but a manufacturing facility that immediately began producing combat drones. Each drone was small enough to avoid detection, but powerful enough to disable alien warships. Within minutes, thousands of them were streaming out of hidden compartments throughout the asteroid belt. Dr. Han watched the global activation from her command center, data streaming across dozens of monitors as humanity's hidden infrastructure revealed itself. Every major city on Earth had been built on top of military installations. Every civilian space station contained weapon systems. Every colony ship that had supposedly been destroyed actually lay hidden in deep space, waiting for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, she broadcast on the secured human frequency, her voice reaching every hidden base and disguised ship in the solar system. Our generals died well. Now it's time to show the galaxy what we've been hiding. The sleeping giant was fully awake now, and it was angry. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stepped out of the shadows in his private quarters aboard the alien command station. His uniform crisp and clean despite having been executed just 12 hours earlier. The holographic generators that had been running continuously since his capture finally powered down with a soft whir, their job complete. He stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders, working out the stiffness from hours of staying perfectly still, while his holographic double performed on the execution platform. The alien guards outside his door had no idea that the man they thought was dead had been hiding in a secret compartment built into the station's own walls. Human engineers had been working on alien vessels for decades, always adding little improvements that their employers never questioned. Hidden rooms, backup power systems, emergency communication arrays, all disguised as routine maintenance. Upgrades. Kim activated his personal communicator and smiled as familiar faces appeared on the screen. General Park Min-soo was grinning from what looked like the bridge of an alien warship. Colonel Bae Jun-ho waved from inside an asteroid mining facility. One by one, all 12 of his fellow commanders checked in, very much alive and ready for the next phase of their plan. Did you enjoy the show? Kim asked, broadcasting his message on all alien military frequencies. Throughout the galaxy, alien commanders who had been celebrating humanity's defeat suddenly found themselves staring at the faces of men and women they had just watched die. The reactions were immediate and satisfying. On the main screen, Kim could see the reptilian admiral who had ordered their execution, stumbling backward in shock, his scaled face turning pale green. The crystalline judges from the tribunal were emitting high-pitched sounds of confusion and fear. Some of the alien officers were frantically checking their sensors, trying to understand how dead humans were appearing on their communication systems. Advanced projection technology, Kim explained casually, as if he were giving a lecture to students. We have been using it for quite some time. Very useful for making people believe what you want them to believe. On Earth, the real show was just beginning. The Han River, which had flowed peacefully through Seoul for thousands of years, suddenly began to glow with a soft blue light. The water level dropped rapidly as hidden pumps activated, revealing that the riverbed was actually the cooling system for a weapon that ran the entire length of the Korean peninsula. Massive heat exchangers that had been disguised as bridge supports and flood control systems now hummed with power as they prepared to cool the planet's primary defense cannon. Mount Hallison, the highest peak on Jeju Island, began to rumble and shake. Tourists who had been visiting the volcanic crater ran in panic as the mountain split open like a giant flower blooming. But instead of lava, the opening revealed a railgun barrel so large that it could be seen from orbit. The weapon had been built inside the mountain over the course of 50 years, disguised as geological research stations and volcanic monitoring equipment. In Seoul, millions of people looked up in amazement as the city itself began to rise. The buildings, the streets, the parks, everything was connected to a massive platform that had been hidden beneath the urban area for generations. Repulsor technology that humanity had officially never developed lifted the entire metropolitan area into the sky, transforming Korea's capital into a flying fortress bristling with weapons that had been concealed inside office buildings and apartment complexes. The same thing was happening in every major city across Earth. Busan rose from its coastal location, revealing anti-ship batteries that had been built into the harbor walls. Incheon's airport transformed into a launch platform for spacecraft that looked nothing like the civilian shuttles that had been using it for decades. Even small towns lifted into the air, their humble appearance hiding defensive systems that could protect them from orbital bombardment. General Park Min-soo materialized on the bridge of the alien flagship through a burst of light that made the air shimmer like heat waves. The quantum teleportation technology deposited him directly behind the captain's chair, where he stood quietly for a moment, watching the alien crew work at their stations. "Surprise," he said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the bridges. "Communication system." The alien bridge crew spun around to face him, some reaching for weapons, while others activated emergency alerts. But their computer systems had already begun displaying error messages and warning signals. For decades, human technicians had been maintaining alien equipment, always with perfect service and reasonable prices. What their clients had never realized was that every repair included subtle modifications, backup programs, and hidden access codes. "Your computers have been compromised for quite some time," Park explained calmly, as alien officers tried frantically to regain control of their own ship. "We have been very patient, waiting for the right moment to use what we installed." Throughout the galaxy, the same scene was playing out on thousands of alien vessels. Computer systems that had been running smoothly for years suddenly belonged to humanity. Weapons that had been aimed at Earth turned toward their own fleets. Life support systems waited for human authorization to continue operating. The aliens' celebration had turned to horror as they realized the truth. They had not conquered Earth. They had walked into humanity's most elaborate trap, and now the trap was closing around them. Commander Yoon. Yoon floated in the command chair of her stealth vessel, watching the alien occupation fleet through sensors that had been recording their every movement for 3 months. Her ship looked like nothing more than a piece of twisted metal, part of the debris field left over from humanity's supposed defeat. The aliens had grown comfortable with the wreckage around them, never realizing that much of it was alive and waiting. "Status report," she whispered into her headset, knowing that hundreds of similar vessels were hidden throughout the solar system. "All ghost ships ready," came the reply from Captain Lee Min-ho, whose destroyer had been disguised as a broken cargo container. "Weapon systems charged and target locks confirmed. Ground forces in position," reported Colonel Bae Junho from somewhere beneath Seoul. "The tunnels are clear, and our people are ready to move." Yoon smiled as she watched the alien ships moving in lazy patrol patterns, their crews probably thinking about the victory celebrations they would have later. The largest vessels hung in Earth's orbit like metal mountains, their weapons pointed down at the planet they thought they had conquered. Some of the smaller ships were actually docked with what they believed were destroyed human stations, their crews exploring the wreckage and taking souvenirs. All units, she broadcast on the secured human frequency. This is Commander Yoon. Execute Protocol 04. Show them what we really are. The transformation began instantly. Throughout the debris field, pieces of twisted metal unfolded like deadly flowers. Hull plates that had been burned and scarred to look like battle damage slid away to reveal weapon ports that glowed with contained energy. Ships that had been drifting powerlessly for months suddenly blazed to life, their engines creating trails of blue fire. As they moved into attack positions, the aliens had less than 10 seconds to realize what was happening before the shooting started. The first salvo came from weapons that the galactic community had never seen before. Energy beams that could cut through the strongest armor, missiles that phased through shields before exploding inside enemy hulls, and gravity projectors that crumpled space itself around their targets. Fire, Yoon commanded, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Earth itself joined the battle in ways that made the laws of physics seem like gentle suggestions. Deep beneath the planet's surface, humanity's greatest secret weapon began its firing sequence. The planet's core had been modified over centuries, turned into a massive gravity manipulation device that could reach across space to touch anything within the solar system. The first pulse from Earth's core weapon was almost invisible, just a ripple in space that moved faster than light itself. When it reached the alien dreadnoughts, 3 of the massive ships simply crushed inward on themselves, their metal hulls compressing until vessels the size of cities became spheres no larger than marbles. The compressed metal glowed white as it fell toward Earth, leaving trails of light across the sky. The planet's magnetic field, which had been secretly enhanced for 300 years, suddenly expanded outward like an invisible storm. Electromagnetic pulses rolled through space in waves, shutting down alien computer systems and leaving entire fleets drifting helplessly. Ships that had been firing on human positions just moments before went dark as their power systems failed, and their life support began to shut down. On the surface, Colonel Bae Jun-ho led his forces up from tunnel systems that ran beneath every major city on Earth. What the aliens had thought were subway systems and utility tunnels were actually military transportation networks that could move entire armies from one side of the planet to the other in minutes. High-speed trains that looked like civilian transport carried soldiers in powered armor, their weapons charged and ready for battle. The aliens who had been occupying human cities suddenly found themselves surrounded by enemies who seemed to appear from the ground itself. Every construction worker they had ignored turned out to be a trained soldier. Every street cleaner carried weapons that could destroy tanks. Every food vendor knew how to operate military equipment that was hidden inside everyday objects. The battle moved through the cities like a storm of light and sound. Buildings that had looked like simple apartment complexes opened to reveal missile launchers and defense turrets. Park benches transformed into weapon platforms. Even the decorative fountains in city squares turned out to be cooling systems for energy weapons that could reach into orbit in space. The alien fleet was discovering that running away was not an option. Human ships that had been hiding in asteroid belts and behind moons for months suddenly appeared on all sides, cutting off every escape route. The vessels that tried to jump too faster than light travel found their engines failing as human technology jammed their navigation systems. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes from the first shot to the last. When the shooting finally stopped, the once mighty alien coalition existed only as scattered debris floating in Earth's orbit and desperate surrender signals being broadcast on every frequency. General Lee So-young stood in what had been the alien command center on Earth's surface, now a smoking ruin filled with broken equipment and defeated enemies. She activated the global communication system and broadcast her message to every world in the galaxy. "This is what happens," she said, her voice carrying 2 billion of alien beings across thousands of worlds. "When you mistake our mercy for weakness, the galaxy would never make that mistake again." Ambassador Kong Minho walked through the grand halls of the rebuilt Galactic Council building, his footsteps echoing off marble floors that had been reconstructed after the war. The architecture was the same as before, but everything else had changed. Where once alien delegates had strutted with arrogance and contempt for younger species, now they moved quietly and spoke in respectful whispers. The council chamber itself looked much the same, with its curved rows of seats rising toward a central podium, but many of those seats now sat empty, marked only by small plaques that listed the names of species that no longer existed. The most aggressive civilizations had chosen to fight humanity to the bitter end, and humanity had obliged them by ending their stories permanently. Kong stepped up to the speaker's podium and looked out at the assembled delegates. Reptilian beings, who had once hissed with contempt, now sat with their heads bowed. Crystalline creatures that had chimed with cruel laughter remained silent and dim. The few species that had shown wisdom during the war sat in places of honor, near the front, while those who had supported the attack on humanity were relegated to the back rows. "We are not conquerors," Kong announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "We never wanted to rule the galaxy or force other species to follow our laws. We are gardeners, and we have been watching this garden for 3 centuries. He paused, letting his words sink in. Many of the aliens looked confused by the gardener comparison, but a few of the older delegates were beginning to understand what he meant. "For 300 years, Kong continued, we have watched and waited, allowing each civilization to show us their true nature. We stayed hidden while you built your empires and fought your wars. We remained quiet while you made your choices about how to treat other species." He gestured toward the front rows, where the peaceful species sat. "Some of you showed wisdom and restraint. You built trade networks instead of slave markets. You solved disputes with words instead of weapons. You helped younger species learn and grow instead of crushing them for being different." Then his hand moved toward the empty seats, and his voice grew colder. "Others chose a different path. They laughed while they hanged our generals. They celebrated the destruction of our colonies. They planned to wipe humanity from the galaxy because they thought we were weak and primitive." The silence in the chamber was complete. Even the soft humming of the building's air circulation system seemed loud in the quiet. Dr. Han Ji-woo stood in the observation deck above the council chamber, watching the proceedings through reinforced windows. Her new title was Director of Planetary Defense, but her real job was much larger than protecting just one world. The monitoring stations she was installing throughout the galaxy would watch every military movement, every weapons development, and every sign that a species might be planning another war of conquest. The technology she was using had been developed in secret for generations, hidden in research facilities that the galaxy had never known existed. Quantum sensors that could detect weapon signatures from thousands of light years away. Computer systems that could predict which civilizations were likely to become aggressive. Communication networks that would allow humanity to respond to threats anywhere in the galaxy within hours, instead of years. She touched the control panel beside her, and holographic displays showed the current status of the monitoring grid. Green lights indicated peaceful trade routes and normal civilian activity. Yellow lights marked areas where tensions were rising and might need attention. Red lights would show active conflicts, but there had been no red lights anywhere in the galaxy for almost a year. Admiral Kim Tae-ho floated on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth through the ship's main viewing screen. The planet looked different now that it no longer needed to hide its true nature. The floating cities moved slowly through the sky, their defensive systems visible as glowing points of light. The orbital defense platforms that had been disguised as space stations now showed their full military configuration. Even the moon had revealed itself as a massive weapons platform, its surface covered with railguns and missile launchers. But it was not the weapons that made him proud. It was the ships moving peacefully between the worlds below. Trade vessels from dozens of different species carried goods and passengers without fear of attack. Scientific expeditions explored new star systems under human protection. Colony ships full of families looked for new homes, knowing that humanity would ensure their safety. "Status report," he requested from his communications officer. "All quiet, sir," Lieutenant Park Sujin replied. The merchant convoy from the Centauri system arrived on schedule. "The scientific mission to the Vega Nebula is proceeding normally. No distress signals anywhere in our patrol area." Kim nodded, satisfied. This was what victory really looked like. Not the smoking ruins of enemy fleets, but the peaceful movement of beings who no longer had to fear genocide or conquest. "They laughed while they thought they were hanging out generals," he said quietly, speaking more to himself than to his crew. "Now they understand that mercy is not weakness. It is a choice, and it is a choice we can revoke." Protocol Zero had ended with humanity's victory, but it had been replaced by something even more important. The age of human guardianship had begun, and the galaxy was finally safe for those who chose peace over war.